Well, boa tarde a todos. Meu nome é Teresa Leite, eu vou introduzir o professor Richard Hill. É um prazer tê-lo connosco. O professor Richard Hill começou por estudar linguística na Universidade de New England. Tirou 3 mestrados, um mestrado de artes em ecologia social, um mestrado de educação dedicado ao mesmo tema, da ecologia social, e um mestrado em cérebro e ciências da mente na Faculdade de Medicina da Universidade de Sydney, sendo que os anteriores foram feitos na Western Sydney University. O professor Richard Hill é presidente da Global Association for Interpersonal Neurobiology Studies, é membro de um grupo internacional de investigação dos genomas psicossociais e da Sociedade Australiana de Hipnoterapeutas Clínicos. É diretor do Mindscience Institute, onde também exerce como terapeuta e supervisor. É editor da revista The Science of Psychotherapy e diretor pedagógico da academia com o mesmo nome. Exerce atividade profissional como psicoterapeuta e counselor, formador e supervisor. Como orador, tem apresentado o seu trabalho a nível internacional, nas áreas da comunicação, das dinâmicas psicológicas, neurociências e do genoma psicossocial. Desenvolveu cursos de formação nas áreas da prevenção do suicídio e fundou a chamada abordagem orientada para a curiosidade. A partir do seu trabalho com Ernest Rossi, nos Estados Unidos, publicou o livro The Practitioner's Guide to Mirroring Hands. Publicou ainda outros livros como Choosing Hope e How the Real World is Driving Us Crazy. É autor de inúmeros artigos científicos e capítulos de livros, tais como Perspectives on Coping and Resilience e Strength-Based Social Work Practice and Mental Health e ainda The Neurological Toolbox, que está para sair a qualquer momento. Professor Richard Hill, I just did a brief introduction to your vast work. As I said, it's a pleasure to have you. We look forward to hearing your presentation. I'll be here to assist in anything you might need. And thank you for being with us. I will now give you the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome to everyone. Bom dia. That's it. That's my Portuguese. So one other thing, if I have to add anything else, very exciting, we've just sent in the manuscript for our next book, which will be brought out by Norton, the American publishers Norton, called The Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Psychotherapy, which is based on the work we do in the science of psychotherapy. And quick hello to Tanya. Excellent. Thank you so much for keeping this all going. Now, let me share my screen because I don't demonstrate any of this. We just talk. Now, let me go. And there we have it. There we go. Everybody's behaving properly now. Thank you, Teresa. So whenever I put up the work I do, I like to put up a picture of this man who is I'm sitting with. And this is Ernest Rossi, who sadly passed away last year in September. And of course, I miss him terribly. He was a mentor. I was his apprentice, really. And he was almost like a father to me. But look, we almost look like father and son, or perhaps uncle and nephew. So he is a wonderful man. And so much of everything I do is reflected from his work. But he always said, Richard, do more than me, do what you do. And so a lot of what we're talking about today is the extensions that he has encouraged me to make. So there's the book that we were talking about. That's the one with mirroring hands, which is one would possibly put it in the area of hypnotherapy, which Ernest Rossi and Milton Erickson came from, but it's really a psychotherapy, and it's an approach to psychotherapy. And we talk about the client responsive approach, which I'm planning on doing another book, but I might do a PhD as well. We'll see. We're much more casual about this here. And our ability to solve problems naturally, and the nature of the way we have mind to body healing. So head down to body healing. So this terribly important sense of what consciousness is all about and what emotions are all about. So emotions. What are they? It is a fascinating thing that as psychotherapists, this is what we deal with predominantly, is emotions, is affect, is the state of someone's their mental state. But really, when you sit with 20 people in a room, 20 people will say 20 different things about what an emotion is. So what I'm going to do is set up parameters, set up definitions that I perfectly well understand. There are other authors that may disagree or use different terms, and you may use different terms. But what we will do is find an agreement, and then you can apply it to your own frame. Because I think here is something that I was actually thinking about the other day, sort of trying to bring up in my mind what I was doing. And so when I teach, what am I doing? Why do I teach? What am I trying to get across to the listener, to the audience? And I think I've got the right answer. I'm interested, and I've got to be careful what I see what that's doing. That's all right. I'm interested to some extent of giving you specific information, to some extent of giving you things that you can reproduce and replicate. But this is what I'm really after. I'm after that moment when you have your own idea, when you have your own realization that you can then grow from what I'm saying. And I don't know why I was so long to realize this, because that was my experience with Ernest Rossi the whole time. He constantly wanted me to come up with my ideas. But as you study, first, like any beginner or early stages, you need to learn the techniques and the details and the specifics before you begin to be creative. So on one hand, I say, get your idea. On the other hand, I say, listen and pay attention. So when we talk about the phenomenology, in English, we just use the term, I suppose, that covers this, is felt experience. It's an experience I can feel. So we often talk of emotions as the felt experience, but there's actually more to that. So to deal with that nature of these experiences we have to spend a brief moment or two just reviewing consciousness, knowing that we actually have no idea really what consciousness is or how we create consciousness, as we call Chalmers' hard question. How does the activity, the electrical activity of neurons create a thought, create a conscious awareness? So we don't really know. But we have a bit of an understanding of three different types of consciousness. And a technical term that is used is anoetic, noetic, and autonoetic. I'll just give you a brief insight into what we mean. So anoetic is really where there is something happening, but you don't really have any conscious or cognitive knowledge of what it is. It's just like, oh, this is something, this is odd, this is something, or, oh, I'm shivering, or, oh, I feel, it's sort of like, where did that come from? I don't know. So it's a state of knowledge or memory in which there's no consciousness, no cognitive awareness of where it came from and how it is you're thinking it, but you know it's there. The second form of consciousness is noetic. Now it's to be aware and to have a cognitive sense of it so that you can actually be aware of the objects and know what they are and see that there are relationships between them. This is more intellectual and factual. And this is where you can be very, very cold, unemotional, very unemotional about your knowledge. Just, it's this, that's a cow is brown. The end. Then we have the form of consciousness that really we deal with mostly in therapy, although noetic we do as well, and the anoetic. But this is the autonoetic. So this is the capacity to be aware on a cognitive level, but actually be able to orient that knowledge and that awareness in time and space and in relation to something very important to you, and that's yourself. So it requires not only just a memory of a fact, but it brings out a memory of that fact in the context of your memory, your autobiographical memory, your memory of your history and your past and yourself. And that is what yourself is. It is a collection of memories that result in a set of interrelated and integrated behaviors, some of which we are consciously aware of, and some of which we are non-consciously or below consciousness aware of. And this, of course, is where we see trauma and insecure attachments and what we call the implicit world. Okay, so there you are. So now you know all about consciousness. Well done. And we did it in 5 minutes. Excellent. A beautiful laugh from Teresa there. She understands. There's a little bit more to consciousness than that. But anyway, so how do emotions emerge into our consciousness? This is what we want to go. How does feelings, how does the stuff that goes on, because these words, emotions and feelings and things, they all get mixed around. But let's be basic, the stuff that goes on. So it can come up from the body. It can also come in from the outside, but it affects the subcortical areas of our brain. That's the things like the basal ganglia, the amygdala, the hippocampus. And that then is taken up, that response is taken up into our cortical region where we're able to think about it, predominantly the prefrontal cortex and the frontal cortex. So it was Joseph Ledoux, the wondrous, glorious person who told us all about the amygdala and fear. And he wrote a book recently called The Deep History of Ourselves, the 4 billion year story of how we got conscious brains. Very simple book. No. But that 2017 paper with Richard Brown is the one that I'm particularly referring to. It was a breakthrough paper. Now, what they talked about is a number of things, and I'll go through these. Now, I'm noticing these slides are moving automatically, so I may slip back every now and again. But the subcortical theory is that stuff comes up from the body, some kind of input that then stimulates, and in this case, we'll talk about fear, because that's what Ledoux was most known for, the amygdala. So it stimulated the amygdala, which was created fear and then fear responses. Now, that's part A, because that's now a bit old-fashioned. And Joseph Ledoux apologizes profusely to everybody. He says, I know it's my fault. I told you all that. That's not actually correct. So it's really interesting when someone who is famous for something actually says, I didn't quite get it right. How about that for inspiration? If that's an idea that you can take away, take that one. He said, no, I think that what the amygdala is a defensive survival circuit. And what it does is it responds to intense input. So that's why it is a lot about fear, it's a lot about things that worry us and survival as in a sense of danger, but it's also about intense emotions like love and passion and beauty, because those things are also important for our survival. And the amygdala holds on to these memories more strongly than the areas of memory that we have in our cognitive regions. Very, very hard to shift memories in the amygdala or the encoding of memories in the amygdala because it's related to survival. And these survivals lead to defensive responses and physiological responses. So therefore, if you're in the high states of passion, then it will have those sorts of sensual, perhaps sexual, but certainly attractive sort of energies. Now that's sort of the subcortical, by stimulus in moving up. And that gives you a sense of anoetical or noetic and or noetic behaviors and fear responses. That happens no matter what your cognitive area is doing. So this is the first order theory. So in the first part, and we'll look here at a visual stimulus for an example. So you get a visual stimulus. This moves into the visual cortex, which is, you know, in the back of the brain. And that creates a phenomenal consciousness, a sense that something is being seen. And this moves up into the upper areas, what we call I've written on the side there. Let me see. I just change the general network of cognition. And we go up into that area, and we then have we're able to bring it into a consciousness, a verbalized something we can say, oh, this is what I see. Now, what Ledoux and Brown have taken us in saying, no, I think it's more, because that part A is just linear. It's just going from that way to that way, and it starts here, goes to there. And that's actually not how systems in the body work. The systems in our body work on a complex way. So they work in a dynamic, integrating, moving way where things are affected and re-affected. So there is feedback. So in part B, he says, with that higher order theory, what we need to take note of is that there is a higher order representation, as we see here, but that representation feeds back to our subcortical regions, or in this case, the visual cortex, and produces more relational thoughts and goes back up and then gives us additional representations. So each time we become aware of something, we become more aware of it and more deeply aware of it. In the first situation here, you might notice, if it's a dangerous situation, the teeth of the saber-toothed tiger, or as happens in a robbery, you might notice the gun or the knife, but not anything else. But as you begin to reframe and refresh, then I'll just go back to that, you add and increase the depth of understanding and perception, even at this non-self-oriented level yet. This is still just picking up, getting the facts. So now we move into this third level of awareness. So in those first two levels, the subcortical, then moving into the higher order representation, these are all experienced as behavioral responses, as responses of they could be emotional, as in the sense of wanting to being fearful by pulling forward, or being interested and moving forward, or fearful and moving back, or interested in moving forward. But they still don't have a strong sense of drive within us, because they're just moving us and getting us to respond for survival. They don't yet mean anything. They don't yet have any meaning. So this is when we move into now what Ledoux and Brown have highlighted and re-exampled. Others have talked about it as well. But it's called the horror theory, the higher order representation of the representation. So we have a anoetic generalized response to stimulus. We have then a movement into the upper cortical areas, creating a higher order representation. Then we start to add to this. So this is here, this working memory, factual knowledge, creating this sense of conscious awareness, but it's noetic, it's only factual. The part B is the one where we work with the most, is where there is a self horror. So we have the situation coming in, the stimulus coming in, moving up into our subcortical and lower cortical regions and our non-conscious working memory. That's a long story, but we haven't got time to cover here. Creating stimulus from factual knowledge, and we bring in the autobiographical knowledge, and suddenly this means something to someone. So once you add the autobiographical, it means something to someone, and it moves into our working conscious, our working memory that is conscious, creating not only a phenomenal consciousness that is noetic, that we know we're having it, but it is a phenomenal self-awareness. So it is something that is happening to me. So now I have a feeling. I feel that all this stimulus and all these behavioral responses and all these increases in things like, I might be sweating, or I might be shivering, or I might have this strong urge to move towards something, that these then become related to the self because you remember other times that you had those experiences and those feelings. And you respond to that with a very personalized feeling. So this is why 5 people or 10 people or 20 people can have a particular set of photographs put in front of them. And depending upon their history, they will have quite different emotional or feeling responses that they relate to. Some who may have had trauma in relation to the picture that is being shown, perhaps it is of something that hurt them, or it is a type of, it is a gender that hurt them, or it is an animal or something that hurt them, then they will have a fearful, not only will they have all those subcortical and first order representations, that person will then become fearful. So they will have a fearfulness about the fear. Equally, a joyfulness about what is good. So all of these emotions, but as therapists, we tend to deal, of course, with the more distressing emotions. So when somebody has a feeling, has a sense of something, but they don't know quite what it is, then this is very most likely what you're looking for. Is you're looking for upward stimuli. You're looking for external triggers. You're looking for internal triggers. Now, these internal triggers could be an inflammatory process going on in the immune system. It could be a disturbance in the gut biota and the bacteria in the gut. It could be actually an illness somewhere in the organs, because our organs actually tend to refer their disturbance. They refer their pain out to the body, and they refer their disturbance up through the viscera. And that's where we get the heart taking what we call heart rate variability. And when we are in an uncomfortable state, a disrupted bodily state, our heart rate variability will become very regular. And this is not good. We want a little bit of variation. Now, as we look here at this self-horror, again, the feedback. So we go up here and our self gets this emotional state, feeds it back to this area, which feeds it up to there, but also feeds it back to the subcortical area. So suddenly you can have a sense of fear just in your cognitive, in your conscious mind. You can have created it just out of some simple trigger, even internally, just internal triggers. And that will feed back into the subcortical and then down into the body. So you can create stress and distress can go down and alter the heart rate variability, have discomfort through the vagus nerve, which goes down, disrupt the gut biota. So this is top down. And then it up, and eventually then you have a total disturbed patient. But when the issues of emotional things, the things that I'm afraid or I'm worried are happening to me, are all coming out of autobiographical memory, and none of it's coming out of the biology, this is very difficult. This is an incongruence. So this is why things like the heart will vary its heart rate to show there's an incongruence, even though there may not be any disturbance in the body at all. So it's very important that whether they're just having something that they're feeling that they need to be able to deal with, or whether it's something that is disturbing them. I feel bad about this pain. Pain is a good one. 10 people who are given a painful experience in an experiment, they will all have the same amount of up from the body stimulus into the subcortical and into that anoetic and noetic experience. But some of them will have histories where pain is disturbing and pain is related to trauma, pain is related to some other discomfort. And they will then have an emotion or a feeling about that pain is bad, or I am bad because of this pain. I am having a pain. I'm not good enough. I can't. And all these negative things then begin to build up here, which then pass down through the system. And our brain turns our body off, as different from the external or the internal stimulus, which goes up and turns our brain off. Okay. Now, how are we all going? Everybody's surviving? All right. So as long as I can see 4 people and they've all said it's okay. All right. So just covering this. So emotions, and I know emotions and feelings are words that are mixed, but emotions or feelings come up from the body and enter into our higher order cognition, and then they become our perception. Our perceptions, which we can invent purely out of autobiographical memory, come down to a higher cognition and come down and create emotions. So there's this two-way street. And this is the change from just subcortical to cortical. It's actually to do with the subcortical to cortical and autobiographical memory. The difference between something happening and something happening to you. So, consciousness, we talked about this, the basic one, awake, responsive, knowing something's happening but not knowing what it's about. Then turning this other description for what I'm saying is subjective experience. So you exist because as a collection and a reflection of the way in which you have integrated your experiences. And so you can reflect on that. And this is what we talk about, to know you know. So you could have the experience, that's just an element, but then to reflect on the experience you're having is to know you know. And that is why we are actually classified as Homo sapien, the species that knows, the man that knows, we're actually classified as a subset, Homo sapiens sapien, the man that knows he knows, or the being that knows he knows. So what are we going to do with that? Let's now just spend, I don't know, 12 minutes. Ooh, time goes. Let's look at how we can apply that understanding a little bit to our work with clients. And this is now moving into the work that I've been doing with Ernest Rossi, and we have published in the Mirroring Hands book, and will be in the Science of Psychotherapy book next year. That fundamentally, and I don't think we need to spend a lot of time trying to prove this, I think it's pretty much obvious, is that what we focus and what our attention is on is what we are noticing, and that gives us our perception of what is happening in our reality. So if all we can see is a saber-toothed tiger jumping out from behind a rock, then we're pretty much going to have a perception of reality that our reality is very dangerous. If we look out into the world and all we see is the difficulties and the struggles, then your perception of reality is going to be based on those struggles. If you look out of the world and see it's all beautiful and wonderful, then your perception is going to be that the world is beautiful and wonderful. And then you have all the things in between. But in the middle of that is really something that, what drives our focus of attention? And it's an orientation, is the term I'm going to use here. So if you have a happy orientation, a pleased orientation, then you're going to see pleasing things. If you have a fearful, traumatic, distrustful orientation, then that's what you're going to see. Putting it very simply, we've all seen this. If we've fallen pregnant, or our partner's pregnant, or our friends are pregnant, then suddenly we look around and there's all these pregnant people. Where did they all come from? Right. And then as soon as you've had it, then you only see people with babies. So I have one grandchild. I'm really keen on another one. So I'm noticing pregnant women all over the place, because I'm wanting my other daughter-in-law to come on, get on with it, get pregnant. So your orientation is very important. So what orientation is best? What works? Because what we want to do is we want to get out of this disrupting consciousness where all our thoughts are just sort of, not happening. Ideally, of course, we want it to be in this integrating consciousness where everything's happening and it's blending in and integrating and doing wonderful. And therapy actually occurs in this sort of consciousness, where we're able to differentiate the elements, pull apart the problem, and put aside the things that are okay, or we hold them separately from those things that are not okay. So if we work with people when they're in this frame, nothing's going to work. You can do the best therapy in the world, but if all their orientation is negative and destructive, then they will destroy you. So this is why we need to establish rapport. This is what rapport means. Move them into a trusting state. And from there we go. There's a chance that you will be able to work and move them in so they're self-organizing and regulating their experience. So here's this new work that I've been doing, the new work over the last 10 years, that there are wonderful orientations. Happiness is a lovely orientation. Positiveness is a lovely orientation. Love is a wonderful orientation. That mindfulness state of just allowing things to pass by so that you're less distressed by things is a wonderful orientation. But there's an orientation that does all of these things. And in fact, there's only one orientation that I found that actually activates all the neurochemicals in the brain at the same time into, and will reorient and rebalance your neurochemicals. and that's curiosity. Because if you think about it, and I go through and there's a longer description in the neuroscience, which we won't do now, but to be curious, you can't be fearful. You can't be moving backwards. You have to be moving forwards. So to move forwards, you need to have some kind of anticipation. Now that's dopamine. You also need to have a reduction in your fearfulness. Well, that's serotonin. I mean, roughly, these are the things. You also need to broaden your scope. So you can't be stressed and worried and focusing on the negatives. You have to broaden your scope. So that is the prefrontal and frontal cortex. So you need to not only broaden it, but you need to sharpen your attention. That's norepinephrine and it's acetylcholine. And what you also need is to get some pleasure out of this so that you seek to repeat it. And that's exactly what happens in curiosity. You discover something and it's like, oh, that was good. And that's coming from your endomorphins and your endocéphalins from area the periaqueductal gray and those areas that are looking after pain and discomfort. And when all these are happening at once, suddenly the brain changes. So when a client comes to me and says, oh, I'm feeling very depressed, I'm feeling very down. Now, this, although they're having biological and stimuli telling them that, they're saying, I am depressed. So there's a degree of opinion in here. There's a message in here. You're trying to tell me something about yourself that is worrying. So you have a depressive focus of attention creating a reality. It is absolutely extraordinary what happens when you say something, oh, wow, you're depressed. Well, that's helpful. Now, I wonder what that depression is trying to tell us. And I go, what do you mean? I'm depressed. You need to fix me of my depression. I said, no. I don't need to fix you of your depression. Your depression is a message, just like pain if I poke you, or blood that comes out. And if you are anxious, well, that would be a different message. So I wonder what that's telling me. Oh, this is interesting. Now, this is really quite fascinating. And now tell me, when do you feel really bad? Oh, you feel really bad then. When do you feel really good? I never feel really good. Oh, you never feel really good. Even as I'm speaking to you, I wonder how many of you are just finding your energy levels lifting a little bit, just going, oh yeah, this is a wonderful state. And a lot of what is effective in therapy is play. Now, certainly there's play therapy, which is terrific. It extends it and organizes it. But play is simply unregulated process. So with children, you put them in a space, you throw a ball in, and that's it. Then you walk away. Now those children will then just start doing things, and eventually something will emerge, and maybe rules will emerge. But if there are no rules to begin with, then the rules that need to emerge. And this is where we have the problem with styles and forms of therapy, is I have someone, they say I'm depressed, I give them CBT. What if CBT isn't right? What if that's not the most ideal therapy? And actually, when we do the research, we find that the mode of therapy, the method of therapy you use, is only responsible for perhaps 13 to 20% of the effectiveness of the experience. The vast majority of the effectiveness is the relationship and the curious interaction that occurs between the therapist and the client and what they create together. So just to give you a little insight. Now, I don't know whether I put the sound on for this when I put in just there.
You'll see.
Now, orientation.
Okay.
How's this little fella oriented?
For myself.
Pretty fearful, I think. Everything he's doing is now fear-oriented. Oh my God, what's that? It's going to kill me.
Calm down. Breathe.
And Papa? Wonder.
Sometimes you gotta get through your fear to see the beauty on the other side.
And what I say is sometimes you have to stimulate your curiosity so the fear goes away. And now his orientation is changed, and look what happens. Play. Unregulated experiment. And look what he does. He makes his own circles. How wonderful. How surprising. Even though Dad was doing a big one, no, you can't do it again. You have to go. Sometimes you have to really tell these things what to do. Dinosaurs are very misbehaving. So, okay. Here we go. Just a quick summary here. Stimulus leads to external or bottom-up work that comes into the subcortical area, creating behaviors and responses, which then moves into a higher order non-conscious representation, but it is an anoetic sense of things, which then moves into a second order of consciousness where it moves into the noetic experience, where you know what's going on. But then you have an interaction with the autobiographical memory, and you suddenly have a self-related awareness that becomes this higher order and becomes an emotional state that is specific to you. And the final thing that I want to say that is really important is that although I talk about all these things, and we in our conscious world, we live in perhaps half a second to a second time span of flow. It takes about that long for things to happen for us to become aware. All these things going on down here in our biology, they happen in milliseconds. So when your conscious awareness, when you move to a new state of conscious awareness, which may take you only a second or so, there could have been thousands of activities and actions going on in between neurons, between genes, between cells, between hormones, between interactive frames. So the nature of the emotion that people have experienced, the nature of the feelings, gives you an indication as a therapist. Am I dealing with a self-related emotion? So therefore I need to work with their history and engage with that. Am I dealing just with an automatic type of, but factual relationship that is probably coming from somewhere deep within and not yet in the automatic memories? Or am I dealing with just something that is disturbing them? So their emotions are saying, I'm disturbed. Their higher order representation of the representation is I'm disturbed, but they don't know what it is. And that is because you're then perhaps you're looking for problems with the heart, problems with the lungs, problems with information, problems with all the many things that if you read my book next year, will explain. So there I am. As I know we're just coming up onto time now. I'm not sure whether we got any space. I haven't really allowed space for questions, but it was a big topic and 45 was pretty good. So that's me, richardhill.com.au. Come find out things. The red book down there, you can actually get for nothing as a PDF from the thing. But I don't advertise it because I don't want everybody to do it. But you can go there. Email me if you wish. Go see the Science of Psychotherapy. That's a wonderful place. And for those who are interested in the mirroring hands, I do a 6-hour video program. Now you can access that through the Science of Psychotherapy as a member. And it's roughly the same sort of price as being a member. So you can join up, do the mirroring hands course and get our several 100 hours of other educational material. So I think that is me.
Thank you, Professor Richard Hill. That was really stimulating and rich. I'm going to have to be thinking about this all day now, Lo, to process
Yes,
it.
it's annoying, isn't it?
No,
Yes.
no, it isn't. It's very nice. We thank you for your presentation and for being so timely. I think we can't leave without having questions from people who really, really, really need to ask something. Let's see.
And while they're just sorting themselves out, Zana here is accentuated. Stimulate curiosity for fear to go away.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you for hearing me.
It's a different approach to therapy, really, turning things the other way around.
Well, I often say that the tail is wagging the dog.
Yeah.
And the therapist is the tail.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, no questions, anybody?
I would just like to comment, my attention is oriented to the use of arts in therapy. And I was particularly focused on what you said about play, because I really believe that that's what unblocks, certain blockages that pain and suffering kind of block us. And sometimes through the use of active art making, then we go into the play zone, and in that zone where there's no right or wrong, and so we diminish the possibility of fear, and then indirectly, the psychological issues kind of start flowing. And so that's what you said is really incredible. Mm-hmm.
Because the psychological, the shift towards well-being is a perfectly natural thing. But yes, you're exactly right, Teresa. We block it because we fear so many things, and there's so many other things going on. But that wondrous experience, and no one worries about it when you're 4. Like my granddaughter, you give her a blank piece of paper and a pen, and she'll just go. Whoa. But you get somebody who's in distress and say, there's a blank canvas and a paper, put whatever you want on it. And they'll go, and there's so many barriers. But what if I get it wrong? This is the winner-loser world thing. That's what the Red Book was about. So it is really interesting. And even though you're out there watching, I can look at your faces. What I'm looking for, and I'm seeing here and there, is what ideas are you having? Not so much, even if your language was, your English wasn't so good, what did you pick up? What's the one thing that you picked up? Because that one thing you picked up is because of an orientation. Because we are focused and aware based on their orientation. Was it a positive thing? Was it a negative thing? Was it a self-advancing thing? Was it a self-critical thing? Was it a nothing? A flat emotion. Everything you're feeling now is a story about, or a potential story, a possible story to give you some insight into what is going on there. Now, Nydia, you're getting something. You're going, I can see it. It's just sort of like, okay. And Susanna, I was looking at you. You were going, and you've gone, oh no, he's talking to me. There you go. Interesting. That wonderful thing. And Anna there, just going, hey, very good teeth, everybody. Very well done. So there's an excitement about being you. And your client, there's an excitement about being them, even if they're having a terrible time. Wow, you're an alcoholic. Fantastic. Oh, I don't think it's very good that I'm an alcoholic. And I had a client like this, and I said, but look at you. You're aware of your affective state, of your emotions. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, why do you drink? He said, because I'm miserable. I said, and how long do you drink till? He said, when I'm happy. I said, oh, great. So you're able to assess your emotions. Not many people can. Well done. You're determined. You will drink that drink. You will find you will get that drink no matter how hard it is. You will persist with something if you think it will help. And a couple of other things. And with this guy, I said, oh dear, you're very poor at decision making because you chose alcohol. And he said, well, how do I get rid of my alcohol? I said, with these things, with your affective capacities, your determination, your persistence. And he went, wow, I am not ruined. I am not an alcoholic. I am just someone who makes bad decisions. And we fixed it. Interesting. I've never done that with a second person, but it worked with him.
There's a question here from one of our participants asking how to think about the important role of working memory in people with alterations in the buffer or central executive functions, as it is the case of people with ADHD. And thank you for your amazing presentation.
That's lovely, Andrea. Yes. Oh, I've just started with a client with this issue, and you know, she will say, oh, I really, you know, that's about my negative attitude to myself. And 3 minutes later, I'll say, and that negative attitude about yourself, so what are you talking about? Well, why are you saying that to me? So what's interesting is this idea that Ledoux and Brown are suggesting is that we also have working memory in the non-conscious area that integrates with the subcortical. But the work with those whose working memory is disrupted, it's probably to do with the salience network. See, what is important becomes very diffracted and blocked and shifted and and goes all over the place. You know, yada yada, all squirrel. So have a little look. There's some wonderful work. John Arden writes some wonderful stuff about that in his book Mind, Brain, Gene. But there's not, because we've got the three networks: the executive, the default mode, and the salience. And the default mode and the executive, you sort of flush between those. So that conscious one and that daydreamy one. And that's regulated by the salience network. So that is the way, and this is what I'm trying to do with my lass now. She's seen me twice. She's had trouble for 20 years. And she said, yes, but when is it going to get better? You know, I said, well, maybe after more than 2 visits. So I'm trying to orient her, what matters to her, what's important, her salience network, if that helps.
Thank you very much. Não sei se há mais alguém que queira colocar alguma questão, mesmo se quiserem colocar a questão em português, que eu posso traduzir.
I would like to ask you, Richard, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, Fatima.
I would like to ask you if do you use to talk about emotion regulation? And if so, where do they happen?
Okay.
In your scheme?
Yeah, well, here's the point of the scheme. So what the scheme is tells you that these feelings, emotions, these altered states, these changes in state occur probably at 3 different potential levels. So first of all, I look to see whether I'm regulating a self-oriented framework. So to give you an example, I had a client who came to me with pain, and it was good. He had a good awareness of the nature of the fact that we have a mental state as well as a physiological state. He said, I've got this injury. It will never go away. I will always have pain at 2 or 3. And occasionally I have a really good time and I'm at 1, but that's as good as it ever gets. He said, but I know when it gets up to 8 or 9. And that that is to do that physiologically, I may be going up to a 4 or 5, but then I'm amplifying it. I'm doing something to amplify it. So I've got 2 areas that I'm working with this person. I'm trying to figure out how to help him regulate and reduce his self pain, his emotion, the emotion of pain, the opinion of the pain that he gives himself. Say, I deserve it. You know, I've been a bad, you know, I've had terrible life. And of course, when I get pain, it should be a lot worse than it is. So he does that. And I'm also working with his physiology, which of course, when you get that pain happening, tenses, tightens, pulls, and amplifies its own self. So I worked with him certainly on that to be able to relax the body so that he didn't. And now my wife is a body worker, so I've learned a lot of that from her. And I used the mirroring hands process with him, and he actually, in a self-developing way, although I opened the opportunity, and this is what therapy is about, creating the opportunity and the circumstances. And although we work with the hands and we try and hold the pain and the not pain, he actually put his hands to the side of his head and said, I have the pain, I have the emotion. And then I said, wonderful. I wonder what you're going to do with it. So I didn't do anything, Fatima. I let him, and he just suddenly went, ugh, and threw it out. I went, and he sat back and he said, wow, I'm now down at a 4. I was at an 8, and I was just about to take a medication which would incapacitate me for half an hour. He says, I like that. I'm going to do that. So I opened up those doorways. But the usefulness of the knowledge was to know that half of his problem was here, but the other half was in that. So like these lovely people who say, eradicate pain forever. I get so annoyed with people, but you certainly can regulate, organize, diminish the pain, the depression, the anxiety, and also excessive over emotional stuff, over love. You know, like I've met this girl and she's wonderful, but I'm driving her crazy. That's also something that you need to regulate, and that's a combination of just good old sex and but also mental attitude.
Thank you very much, Professor Richard Hill. That was a very stimulating talk, and it gives us a lot to think about. We thank you again for being with us and sharing your knowledge. I'm going to pass the phone for Professor Tanya. She's our director of the Institute of Psychology, who wants to tell you a final word. Thank you on behalf of all of us for sharing your thoughts and giving us this opportunity to really focus on awareness and integrating the awareness with the body and the experience, which is a very rich way to work in therapy. Thank you so much.
I'll just say something very, very quick, Tanya, before you say, just a question about migraines. Much, much more complicated. We're talking about electrical stimulation and uncontrolled stimulation. All this stuff has relevance, but it's much, much more complicated and is kind of another talk. So keep working on that migraine one. Sorry, Tanya.